Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Thursday, August 18th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. Why exactly did the FBI search Mar-a-Lago? A judge could release the affidavit that explains why, probably with a lot of parts blacked out. We'll consider what this could mean for the Justice Department's investigation. A top executive at Donald Trump's family business is pleading guilty to tax fraud. What does this mean for the former president? Then,
continue to show who Deshaun Watson really is, and the people that meet me and that's around me, they'll figure out who I really am too.
Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson will sit out 11 games without pay for accusations of sexual misconduct. What message does the penalty send? And is it enough? Plus, author Salman Rushdie remains the target of a decades-old fatwa calling for his death. We'll explain what a fatwa really is and how this one came about. And there's more help for women struggling to afford menstrual hygiene products. You'll meet a group that's tackling period poverty in tonight's feature report. Let's begin tonight in Florida. A judge has given a tentative okay to release parts of the affidavit used to justify a search of Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. A lawyer for the Justice Department told the judge that this investigation is, in their words, open and in its early stages. DOJ does not want the affidavit unsealed at all. NBC News is among the media outlets asking the court to release it in full. We are arguing in favor of transparency. The judge proposes releasing the affidavit with sensitive information blacked out or redacted. Now it's a matter of drafting the redactions. So far, we've seen the warrant application. It lists 3 federal statutes justifying the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. They involve willfully holding on to national defense information, concealing or removing government records, and obstructing a federal investigation. But to be clear, hear me on this. Any actual charges would be in an indictment or a criminal complaint, not in the affidavit, not in the warrant. Joining us now is NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirshner. He's also a former federal prosecutor. Glenn, what do you make of the judge's decision to at least entertain the idea of releasing the affidavit in some form?
You know, Joshua, I think the judge probably struck a sensible middle ground, even though I think lots of former feds, myself included, were suspecting that the judge would probably not be inclined to disclose any information about an ongoing investigation, particularly one with national security implications and information that could compromise witness security. But I think we need to realize that what we saw in court today was not the Department of Justice versus Donald Trump. It was, as you mentioned in your opening, the news organizations, the Fourth Estate, if you will, trying to get some transparency into a case, into a matter that is of searing public interest, probably the most important in many ways criminal case in my lifetime. And, you know, they were fighting on behalf of the public's right to know. So I think the judge sensibly said, listen, I want the prosecutors to take a good faith first crack at only redacting out of the affidavit that information that would really compromise the ongoing investigation. And then I will assess whether the unredacted portions can be released. So there is more to come on this front.
Are there any standards, Glenn, in terms of how redactions work? I mean, I don't know if the Justice Department is just allowed to go, oh, you want us to redact it? Okay, fine. Line by line, black, 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 and just leave the whole thing as just a bunch of black bars. Is it allowed to do that, or do they have to leave some information open? I mean, are there ground rules for this?
You know, each issue like this is intensely unique. It's based on the facts and circumstances of the investigation. I would advise the prosecutors to make a good faith effort, because you know what, if they over redact, the judge is going to take a look at it and say, you know what, that was not a good faith effort, because I believe that there are some things they probably can reveal to the public. For example, we know about DOJ officials traveling to Mar-a-Lago, I believe it was in June, meeting with Trump and his team And they apparently were assured that, nope, we've given you everything. Well, it turns out that was untrue, which in part is what necessitated the search warrant. And they recovered more documents during the execution of that search warrant. So those are the kind of things that are publicly known, and that it doesn't seem like, if revealed, they would necessarily damage the ongoing investigation.
I think we have to be fair to the DOJ in part in terms of just the circumstances surrounding all of this. I mean, this is a highly politically charged matter, and I don't think that we would be asking for an affidavit in a case like this if it wasn't. What about the DOJ's argument? You know, the Attorney General Merrick Garland's contention, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but basically, we got a job to do. Buzz off. If there are charges, you'll see the charging document that we'll be happy to talk about everything, but let us do our job. Stop, poking your noses in places where they don't need to be.
Well, you know what, Joshua, as a federal prosecutor inside the Department of Justice for decades, that was my professional home. I often took the position, buzz off, though I'd like to think I said it a little bit more tactfully in litigation. But listen,
right.
It was my responsibility to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation. And it was certainly my responsibility to protect the witnesses who, in a very real sense, put their necks on the line by assisting federal prosecutors against Donald Trump. We know witness intimidation is a thing with Trump and company. We've seen it when Cassidy Hutchinson testified to the J6 committee, and we learned that she had been intimidated, or at least there was an attempt to impede, obstruct, and intimidate Cassidy Hutchinson. So listen, as a former career prosecutor, you bet I wanted to protect the integrity of my investigation. I wanted to protect my witnesses, and I didn't want to deter other witnesses who I had not yet identified or dealt with from coming forward if they saw that when witnesses did get involved, there was going to be hell to pay.
The other thing I'm wondering about, Glenn, is what happens from here. In our legal system, accusation is not proof. You are innocent until proven guilty. And just because there's a search does not causally necessarily mean that that search will lead to the charges that many people, I think, are expecting. And I doubt that Merrick Garland would have brought it this far if he didn't believe that there was something to be investigated. But part of me just kind of wonders, if we have this affidavit, the search warrant, and then when we see a charging document, an actual indictment, if it doesn't line up with what people had been expecting leading up to now, that factors into this whole atmosphere of, well, what is the Justice Department doing and what are these federal prosecutors doing? I feel like we have to level set a little bit and not kind of get ginned up for what might feel like an inevitability. There's a lot we don't know yet.
Yeah, and I'm glad you highlighted that just because a search warrant was executed, all we can conclude from that is that a federal judge found there was probable cause to believe there was evidence of crime located on the property at Mar-a-Lago. But here's a cautionary tale. It was about 16 months ago that a federal judge in New York concluded, by probable cause, that there was evidence of crime to be found in Rudy Giuliani's electronic devices. And I believe 13 of his, laptop computers and phones and other electronic devices were seized by the FBI. Here we are 16 months later. There have been no criminal charges of Rudy Giuliani. So let that be a lesson. We should not expect that there will be charges of Donald Trump promptly or necessarily at all just because a search warrant has been executed.
NBC News legal analyst Glenn Kirshner, appreciate you walking us through this. Glenn, thanks very much. Now, this whole situation has to do with how the former president handles classified information. It might help to look at how he handled sensitive documents during his term. On August 30th, 2019, President Trump tweeted an image of an Iranian missile launch site. According to a former senior intelligence official, that picture was highly classified, taken by a secret spy satellite. Another former senior official told us Mr. Trump, quote, spent no time understanding what made something a secret and what we protected, unquote. Presidents have the power to declassify documents. President Trump said so at the time to his team to justify the tweet. Typically, intelligence officials consult on declassifications to protect national security. NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian got the story behind that tweet, and he joins us now. Ken, tell us more about this incident and the back and forth between the president and the intelligence staff in terms of whether to tweet it or not.
Good evening, Joshua. Well, it starts from the premise that early on in the administration, senior intelligence officials realized that Donald Trump was not going to read even very short, simple summaries of his intelligence briefing. So they took to taking in striking images, catchy graphics, charts with headlines, preferably with his name in the headlines, they told me. And so on this day in August of 2019, they brought in this highly classified photo of what had been a mishap of some kind with an Iranian missile launch. So the Iranians had taken it on the chin. And so Trump was delighted by that, and he said immediately, I'm told, he said, I'm going to tweet this. And he went to call Dan Scavino in, who operated his Twitter account. And there began a long period of senior intelligence officials, and I'm talking about CIA Director Gina Haspel, the DNI at the time, Joe McGuire, and a guy named Charlie Kupperman, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor, trying to talk Donald Trump out of tweeting this because they said, sir, we spent millions of dollars, on these highly classified esoteric satellites that take these pictures. The resolution is way better than anything in the commercial space. Our adversaries are going to now understand our capabilities if you put this out. He just didn't get it. He said, well, I'm the president, right? I can classify anything I want. And they said, that's correct, sir, but could you at least let us give you a picture with lower resolution? He just wasn't interested in that. And so within an hour of the briefing, he tweeted out this photo to the world. Experts immediately knew it was a highly classified photo. The government didn't really confirm it at the time, but this official confirmed it to me. And there was, unspecified damage done to U.S. national security as a result of that episode, and mainly because Donald Trump wanted to taunt the Iranians on Twitter, Joshua.
With regard to what the president said in terms of being able to declassify anything he wants, is that true?
It is true. As a matter of fact, the president has absolute declassification authority. And in that case, after he tweeted that photo, it became declassified. Now, it gets a little thornier in this situation we're in now where some of Trump's acolytes are saying there was a standing order to declassify anything that came out of the White House and went to Mar-a-Lago. Most experts say that's a fiction. Well, first of all, nobody believes that order existed, but there is no such thing. I mean, the president, even when he says, I hereby declassify something, there has to be some kind of process, some kind of memorialization of that fact, and the bureaucracy has to carry out his orders. And if they don't do that, then it's not declassified. And so that may be some of what's at issue with these Mar-a-Lago documents.
Do we know of any other incidents, Ken, where this kind of declassification conflict took place during his administration?
Well, there certainly were a number of incidents where he inadvertently or carelessly disclosed classified information. One that comes to mind, probably the worst one, was early in the administration when some senior Russian officials, including the foreign minister, the ambassador of the United States, were in the Oval Office, and he disclosed highly classified, sensitive information that had to do with an ISIS counterterror program and an allied contribution to our intelligence picture. The details aren't 100% clear, but that was a terrible episode. And then there are other times where he was trying to declassify parts of the record in the Trump-Russia investigation, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, because he thought it would expose wrongdoing by the FBI. And the intelligence community was saying, look, this is going to really expose sources and methods. So actually, on the day before he left office, he issued a lengthy declassification order for some of these documents. But it appears that since he left, the bureaucracy did not carry out that order, and those documents remain classified.
I wonder if you can tie this to the Mar-a-Lago investigation now. I think supporters of President Trump will say, see, everyone's been after Donald Trump from the very beginning. You guys don't like him. You hated the way that he governed, and now you're pulling up dirt from the past to try to make it look like he's the bad guy. And opponents of President Trump will say, see, this is why we could never trust him in the first place. He never should have been given national security power. This is why we should lock him up under a jail and throw away the key. How do we fit this into this political narrative, which continues to snowball around what's happened at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, to me, Joshua, this is very simple. I've covered the intelligence community a long time. Any intelligence community employee who took highly classified documents home, and it's happened before, would quickly find their homes raided by the FBI if the authorities learned about that, and would soon find themselves in prison. And that has happened many times over the years. There was a guy who hoarded documents for years from the NSA in his house. So there's that, and there's also what we're being told by former intelligence officials, that Trump just would grab intelligence documents like this satellite photo and other things willy-nilly, and they weren't sure exactly what he did with them. And they suspect that some of them may have ended up in those banker boxes that ended up in Mar-a-Lago. But again, I think that because the DOJ is saying there's an extensive criminal investigation here with witnesses, and it seems to me this is about more than just the president taking classified documents home to his house. But we're just going to have to wait and see where this investigation goes.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate the context on all of this. That's NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. Still to come, former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg pleaded guilty to tax fraud charges today. What might this mean for the former president? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. The former CFO of Donald Trump's family business is preparing for jail time. Today, Alan Weisselberg pleaded guilty to multiple tax fraud charges involving the Trump Organization. Mr. Weisselberg has agreed to pay nearly $2 million in taxes, interest, and penalties. He'll also serve 5 months behind bars on New York's Rikers Island, followed by 5 years of probation. The deal also requires Mr. Weisselberg to testify against the Trump Organization. He and the company were first charged in June of 2021 for an off-the-books scheme that helped top officials in the Trump Organization avoid paying taxes. A statement from the Manhattan District Attorney reads in part, quote, "This plea agreement directly implicates the Trump Organization in a wide range of criminal activity," unquote. What impact will this have on Mr. Trump and his family's business? NBC correspondent for investigations Tom Winter has more.
Alan Weisselberg today turned from the Trump Organization CFO to somebody who's turning against the Trump Organization as part of his plea agreement with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, who's been investigating him for several years now, along with the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Today, Alan Weisselberg agreeing with prosecutors to 15 counts associated with off-the-books payments. He received payments for multiple Mercedes-Benz, for an apartment, for a garage, all of which would have been completely legal by receiving those payments from the Trump Organization if he had paid the taxes. Prosecutors said that he didn't, and now he agrees with them. In exchange for agreeing with them and pleading guilty, he'll have to serve 5 months in Manhattan's infamous Rikers Island jail, but that'll be after the Trump Organization itself goes to trial in late October, just a couple of weeks before the midterm elections. Weisselberg will have to testify against his former company, the company he used to do the books for.
That was NBC's Tom Winter reporting. We'll get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including a potential catastrophe in Ukraine at Europe's largest power plant, a harsher punishment for NFL quarterback Deshaun Watson, and American Airlines' big bet on supersonic jets. Tonight's headlines begin in Ukraine, with more concerns over the largest nuclear plant in Europe. Russian forces captured the Zaporizhzhia power plant in the early days of the war. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, Russia has allegedly told workers not to show up tomorrow. That's fueling concerns about some sort of incident at the plant. NBC's Josh Lederman has more from Dnipro in Ukraine.
Russia's military is warning that it expects Ukraine to carry out a nuclear provocation on Friday at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest plant in Europe. Now, to back up a bit, Russia controls this territory. It has occupied the power plant and the area around it. But Ukraine has been accusing Russia of attacking the plant itself with artillery strikes for weeks now, saying that Russia is attacking the nuclear plant to try to blame Ukraine and make Ukraine look like it's risking its own population. Today, I spoke with a Ukrainian military intelligence official who said that they had just learned that Russia has ordered employees of its state-run nuclear company, Rosatom, to leave the nuclear power plant and not to show up to work tomorrow. Ukrainian officials taking that as a sign that Russia is planning some type of an incident there tomorrow, wants to blame it on Ukraine, but wants to get its own personnel out of there beforehand to make sure they're not harmed. We also heard from the energy company here in Ukraine today urging pregnant women and children who are in Zaporizhia to leave immediately, saying they would be at the greatest risk for radiation if it were to start to spread. And today, we also saw the Secretary General of the United Nations here in Ukraine meeting with President Zelensky as well as Turkey's President Erdogan, urging the Russians to take their military equipment and their troops and to leave that nuclear power plant. Russia responding, saying it has no intention of considering that proposal.
That was NBC's Josh Letterman reporting from Ukraine. The CDC is investigating an E. coli outbreak in the Midwest. At least 29 cases were reported in Ohio and Michigan. 9 people have been hospitalized. It's unclear where the outbreak began, but officials are interviewing people who got sick about what foods they've been eating. Ingesting E. coli bacteria usually causes symptoms 3 or 4 days later. The CDC recommends just basic food hygiene to stay safe, clean your hands and surfaces, separate your uncooked food from raw meat, cook your food thoroughly, and keep your perishables refrigerated. The NFL and the Players Union have reached a disciplinary settlement for Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. More than 24 women have accused him of sexual misconduct. He will serve an 11-game suspension. This month, he was originally penalized 6 games. Mr. Watson will also pay a fine of $5 million. Today, he denied any wrongdoing.
I have to continue to push forward with my life and my career. And for us to be able to move forward, you know, I have to be able to take steps and put pride to the side. And I'm going to continue to stand on my innocence and keep pushing forward. And I've always, you know, stood on not disrespecting or sexual assaulting anyone.
What are you apologizing for then? What are you apologizing for?
For everyone that was affected about this situation. There was a lot of people that was triggered.
Deshaun Watson will also undergo evaluation by behavioral experts and follow whatever treatment program they suggest. Joining us now is author and sports journalist Mike Wise. Mr. Wise, tell us a little bit more about what led up to this before I get your reaction to the settlement that was reached with Deshaun Watson.
Sure, Joshua. Between March 20th, 2020 and 2021, while with the Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson was accused of sexual assault and other inappropriate predatory behavior towards 25 different massage therapists during sessions he had with them. It should be noted that he is settled out of court with 24 of these women, and essentially they've said he conducted himself quite inappropriately in their sessions.
What do you make of the decision to suspend him for 11 games, fine him, send him to some kind of a treatment program, and this bumped up suite of punishments from the original 6-game suspension? What do you make of that?
I think Roger Goodell is going to look better than he probably should in this instance, because he appealed the original suspension, the NFL did, and they wanted a full season, which now is 17 games. He got 11 games. There are many advocacy groups that I believe rightly are complaining about that suspension today. And while $5 million sounds like a lot of money to you and me, that's 2%, again, 2% of Mr. Watson's contract that he just signed with the Cleveland Browns. So if anybody ever got off with a slap on a wrist, it was Deshaun Watson this afternoon.
So you've got Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, trying to find some kind of solution that increases the punishment. And I hear what you're saying in terms of the impact of it on him, on Deshaun Watson specifically. What about on the Cleveland Browns? How are they responding to this, and how are they preparing to face the season?
Well, they took a lot of heat just for the $240 million contract that was given to him. I think at this point, they're going to go with a veteran journeyman quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, to take Deshaun Watson's role until he returns to the until he returns to the field. I think their larger problem is, Joshua, they're going to face a lot of blowback from different advocacy groups and, frankly, visiting teams, fans that will jeer them for their behavior in this matter. Now, they are behind giving Deshaun Watson a second chance, and they are all about the counseling and the behavioral punitive measures that were doled out. But bottom line is, Cleveland looks like there was almost a numbness and insensitivity before the investigation was even over. This contract was given to him.
What you described in terms of the team's posture reflects what we heard from Jimmy Haslam, who's the owner of the Cleveland Browns. Here's part of what he said today. Watch.
Since Deshaun came into our building in April, he has done everything we have asked of him and more. And he has been the person, the leader that we expected him to be. I think he understands where he is in his life. It's a pivotal point, and we as an organization are going to do everything we can to help him not only be the best football player he can be, but more importantly, to be the best person he can be. And we're going to support him in every way possible during the suspension and during what will hopefully be a long career with the Cleveland Browns.
How do you think this fits into the NFL's capacity to deal with issues like sexual harassment and sexual abuse allegations? What's the larger effect on the league?
It's funny. Everybody says winning is the great deodorant. It covers up the stench of anything. And you could say that the Browns will, if they start winning football games, people will begin to forget about this. But big picture, Josh, where you're looking at the investigation in Washington with Daniel Snyder and the toxic workplace culture and all the sexual assault allegations there. We're looking at years ago, Ray Rice, the video appearing of him knocking unconscious his fiance at the time, and in an NFL that barely took action until that video came out. This today is, I don't want to say it's a slap in the face to every licensed professional massage therapist that either worked on him or has been besmirched by his actions. But to not have any remorse, I think that looks awful for the league. And to essentially settle out of court with 24 of these women and now claim no responsibility whatsoever, I cannot see this looking good for the NFL long term.
Author and sports journalist Mike Wise, appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It has been decades since supersonic jets carried travelers around the world. This week, American Airlines announced plans to invest in a new generation of these jets. American says it put down a deposit for 20 supersonic jets with the option to buy more. An aerospace startup called Boom Supersonic will make the jets. They're expected to fly twice as fast as today's fastest commercial aircraft. We discussed it recently with CNBC auto and airline reporter Phil LeBeau. Joining us now is CNBC auto and airline industry reporter Phil LeBeau. Phil, talk about how these new jets fit into American Airlines' plans. Is this a central part of their future strategy? Is this kind of a perk, a special feature? How are they thinking about this?
Well, it's a long-range plan, Joshua. What American is thinking, similar to what United Airlines is thinking, because United also has placed an order for these Boom supersonic jets, is to have supersonic travel available by the end of this decade. Now, that's a big if, whether or not it's going to be available. But if it is available, if this plane is approved by regulators, if it passed all the flight test requirements, that would be a nice feature for American to offer its customers. Because if you can say to somebody, look, we'll take you from the American hub in Miami, we will fly you to New York or to London, a flight that usually takes maybe 10 hours, 9 hours, and we can do it in 4.5 to 5 hours, well, that would be very attractive.
Talk about what it was about these jets that attracted American and United. What makes them so special?
Well, the possibility of cutting transatlantic and trans-Pacific flight times 40 to 50%. If you can put these into service on a regular basis, it could be a game changer, especially on those popular long-haul international routes. Now, the interesting thing will be whether or not people will say, yes, I want this, because these are going to be more expensive. We don't know what the price is going to be for one of these flights, but it will be more expensive than a conventional airplane, whether you're going on a 777 or an A350, whatever it might be. You are going to have to pay for that speed.
What about the science behind these jets? I mean, I heard about this and I immediately thought of the Concorde, which flew for a long time and then was grounded in 2000 after that deadly crash in France. Are they re-engineering this kind of supersonic jet to avoid that fate, or is this a very different kind of situation? I don't want to conflate this with the Concorde unless the comparison is apt.
Right. The only comparison between the Boom Overture, that's the name of the supersonic jet, and the Concorde is that both will, if everything goes as planned for the Overture, fly at supersonic speeds. Remember, the Concorde was really dated technology. At the time, it was up to date, but when you look back on it now, the engines, the frame, everything about it is dated by today's standards. The Overture will have carbon fiber composite fuselage. It will also have new engines, although the engine manufacturer hasn't been picked yet, and it'll fly on sustainable aviation fuel, so the emissions will be close to zero. And so when you put all that together, if it comes together as Boom Supersonic says it will, it could be a game changer.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the fuel, because that was something I was definitely going to ask you about. That feels like an issue for the airline industry right now, not only because of what oil prices are around the world, but also because I think a lot of consumers are getting more concerned about the impact on the environment. I mean, there was just this big hue and cry over private jets that some celebrities are flying and whether or not they should be flying them. What about that piece of airline modernization, just changing the fuel that we fly in? Do we have to wait for these new jets, or might that begin to evolve sooner?
The technology is there, Joshua. That's the good news. Sustainable aviation fuel can power most of the commercial airplanes right now, and it'll power them in the future. The issue is cost. Sustainable aviation fuel is much more expensive than conventional jet fuel. Now, the good news is the new IRA bill that was passed and signed into law by the president. It calls for incentives for airlines to use sustainable aviation fuel. In other words, there will be allocations of money to help out airlines and the providers who create sustainable aviation fuel so they can bring that cost a little bit more in line with jet fuel. Now, will that be enough for everybody to convert over to sustainable aviation fuel? I think it's going to take some time, but the airlines are under pressure already in Europe, and likely they're going to face it more here in the United States and also in Asia over time to bring down their emissions. They want to use sustainable aviation fuel. The real question is bringing that cost closer to a level that's equal to jet fuel.
Before I got to let you go, Phil, this sounds like an interesting innovation, but I think people who are flying right now would be forgiven for thinking there are other things on the airline industry's to-do list besides supersonic jets. I mean, we have all kinds of air traffic control issues. We had issues around New York City not too long ago. There was a big Wall Street Journal write-up about why Florida has been so problematic with flights between military flights and lots of commercial flights, commercial space flights that are making airspace very cramped and crowded. There's a huge labor shortage. And then there's just the airline experience, which still has a lot of evolving to do. Don't the airlines have bigger, more important things to worry about than supersonic jets? Cool as they may be, don't they have bigger problems right now?
Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. But think of it this way. Both American and United are not allocating large sums of money to Boom Supersonic. They have put down deposits for these aircraft, which, again, may go into commercial service, 7, 8, 9 years from now? So this is not on the airlines. This is on Boom Supersonic. If Boom Supersonic can come together and put all the pieces in place so that it can build a supersonic jet, well, then that's great. Then the industry has evolved, and the airlines will be ready to put these into service. In the meantime, American, United, and other airlines that are looking at these supersonic jets, they're focused on the business, as they should be right now. They're not really focused on supersonic flight.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where this goes from here. Thank you, Phil. That's CNBC's Phil LeBeau. Last night, we discussed the $80 billion of funding going toward the IRS. The money is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has already directed the agency to brainstorm ideas for reforms. Plenty of you also had thoughts on how the IRS should use these funds. Here's what Michael left in our inbox.
They have these forms that people fill out, and they're daunting, horrible forms. There's no reason for that. They could be, they could be much simpler to fill out. And it's not just that. I mean, if you need to communicate with the IRS, like, it's a hassle. Like, it's a nightmare. I mean, it should be like almost like calling customer service at Apple. You have a problem, you're late in your taxes, like, no big deal. You call, you get a nice rep like you do at Apple. You do a payment plan, and you take care of it.
That would be nice. Good ideas, Michael. Marjorie wrote, seniors who receive Social Security should not have to pay taxes at age 80 and above. This includes those seniors with pensions. A country that honors elders will receive honor and set an example for the world. Well said, Marjorie. Thank you. But of course, to be fair, collecting taxes is the IRS's job. Tax policies and exemptions, we'll have to ask Congress for that. We still welcome your ideas or thoughts on this. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. You can leave us a voicemail at 888-575-2NBC or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Iran is blaming Salman Rushdie and his supporters for the stabbing that put him in the hospital. We'll take a closer look at FATWAs when we come back. Today, the man accused of stabbing author Salman Rushdie pled not guilty to attempted murder and assault charges. Prosecutors say the 24-year-old attacked Rushdie before a lecture last week in upstate New York. Rushdie's agent says the writer is getting treatment for severe wounds and could lose an eye. Police are investigating the suspect's motives. The Iranian government has denied any involvement, but there is speculation that the attack stems from a fatwa issued in 1989. That was a religious order by an Islamic leader in response to Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses. When that book came out, it sent shockwaves through the world. It inspired protests and book burnings. There were even attacks against the book's translators. The then supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, issued a decree, a fatwa. He used his role in leadership to call for the killing of Rushdie, his publishers, and editors. Joining us now is Professor Sherman Jackson, the King Faisal Chair of Islamic Thought and Culture at the University of Southern California. He's a distinguished professor specializing in religion, ethnicity, and American studies. Professor Jackson, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Give us the most basic definition. What is a fatwa?
Well, I think to begin with, in order to avoid a lot of potential confusion, we have to understand certain distinctions between the majoritarian Sunni tradition and the Shiite tradition. In both, a fatwa is basically a non-binding legal opinion issued by a formally trained, authorized scholar of the religious law on a matter of the religious law. In other words, even if the scholar is formally trained, if I ask him, well, who's the greatest of all time, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, his opinion would not constitute a fatwa because that is not a question of the religious law.
So this has to do with how religious law, how Islam is applied in one's life in a more Islamic legal circumstance. Is that it?
Yeah, well, in other words, a fatwa is a clarification of a point of Islamic law. So, for example, the Quran may tell me I must fast during the month of Ramadan. Well, what if I'm a mother who's nursing? Well, then I go to a mufti and I ask him, and he says, well, you must or you may not. That's a fatwa. It clarifies that point of ambiguity that I might otherwise have regarding the religious law.
Remind us why the Ayatollah at the time. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, again, it's really important to understand and to keep in mind that a fatwa in and of itself is a non-binding legal opinion. It is not a decree as would be issued by a court. An authorized mufti may issue a fatwa. The fact that he or she has issued that fatwa does not bind me to that particular fatwa. I may believe that that fatwa is sound. I may believe that there are other muftis who have different opinions and who have a sounder understanding of the law. So I may not accept that fatwa and accept the fatwa of another authorized jurist. So a fatwa is not in and of itself binding.
Gotcha. So these legal interpreters, these muftis, issue fatwas as advisory opinions that are not necessarily a directive or an order. Why did this particular fatwa about the satanic verses have so much heft over the decades? For all intents and purposes, it certainly felt like an order.
Yes. Well, I mean, again, this comes to one of the distinctions that I sort of alluded to earlier between the Sunni tradition and the Shiite tradition. In Shiism, you have a bit more formally organized religious establishment. At the top of that religious establishment is a cadre of religious scholars who are understood to be of the highest caliber of religious learning. They, for that reason, acquire a very high degree of authority. An individual Shiite generally choose one of these highly qualified scholars, known as a marja', to follow in their opinions. Once a Shiite individual has chosen a marja', that marja''s opinions become binding for those who have chosen to follow him. That's part of the modern arrangement of 12-er Shiism in Iran. The other issue I think that we have to pay some attention to, at least, is that particularly at that time, Khomeini was such a huge figure that people would attribute religious authority, religious significance to virtually anything he said. So even beyond what he says that addresses specifically religious legal questions, his opinions as this larger-than-life figure are taken to be meaningful and valuable, and for many people, something to be acted upon.
All right, so that's very clarifying. I appreciate you throwing that in, Professor, because the understanding, I think, between Sunni and Shia fatwas, or the way that Sunni and Shia Muslims view it, clarifies things, since Iran is a majority Shiite nation. Other nations, Saudi Arabia is majority Sunni, so that kind of clarifies a bit. I know I have to let you go in a minute, but the investigation is still going on in terms of this suspect in the stabbing of Salman Rushdie. There's so much going on right now in terms of misinformation and disinformation and conspiracy theories and everything else. What is your sense of whether or not this fatwa may have hit its target, as opposed to any one of 1,000 other reasons why Salman Rushdie may have been attacked, before we go?
Well, again, I mean, I can't get inside of the mind of the young man who attacked Salman Rushdie. But speaking in terms of standard Shiite doctrine, a marja's fatwa is binding on his followers only during his lifetime. Khomeini issued this statement, and quite frankly, I'm a little bit diffident about even referring to it as a fatwa, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. But Khomeini issued this statement in 1989, February, I believe it was, in 1989. He died in June of that year. So that was before this young man was even born. So I don't know if the fatwa itself is something that actually informed his action, or if it did, and I'm not suggesting that it did not, because, I mean, he may have understood that once Khomeini gives a fatwa, it's valid for life, and I'm a devout Shiite, and I want to go and act on that fatwa. But I think that it is the ongoing sense of grievance that certain Muslims in certain parts of the world have, and oftentimes those grievances are expressed in rather unfortunate ways.
USC Professor Sherman Jackson, this is extremely helpful. I appreciate you clarifying all this for us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
One place where inflation is hitting hard, women's hygiene products. Now some groups are helping people struggling with period poverty. Our special series on menstrual health before we go. Between the ongoing tampon shortage and rising inflation, menstrual hygiene management is becoming harder and more expensive. But it's only contributing and compounding on a problem that's existed for a long time: period poverty. Roughly 500 million people are affected by period poverty around the world. In the third installment of our menstruation mini-series, NBC's Maura Barrett takes a closer look at period poverty and how one organization is battling it from their van.
Lynette Medley is in the business of busting secrets.
These are all maxi pads?
Mm-hmm. Her latest project involves something that a bulk of the world's population hides: the secrets and stigmas surrounding menstruation.
The spot is here to end period poverty, end period stigma, and end period shame.
What is period poverty? The Journal of Global Health Reports defines it as a lack of access to menstrual products, hygiene facilities, waste management, and education that affects many women globally, causing physical, mental, and emotional challenges. At least 500 million people around the world struggle with menstrual hygiene management. And in the U.S., roughly 16.9 million menstruators are living in poverty. About 2/3 of those people were unable to afford menstrual products in the past year, many forced to choose between vital hygiene products and food. It's something Lynette herself used to struggle with.
The spot was founded out of basically turning my own pain into my passion and just understanding the pain of our communities.
What did period poverty look like for you?
Not having the funds to pay for the menstrual products that I needed, suffering in silence, using paper towels or whatever I could use, and not having a voice to articulate that this was a need.
Federal support programs like SNAP and WIC do not cover menstrual products, leaving it up to organizations like No More Secrets to fill in the gaps.
And how much of a difference would it make to see something like SNAP or WIC cover these products?
It would make a world of difference. These are the group of people who we've already identified as needing extra assistance, and it would help them because they are the baseline.
Lynette runs the spot with her daughter, Naya. Their nonprofit gives out free period products to anyone in need, sometimes up to 1,500 people a week.
So you've got a huge pile here.
Yes.
And I see even more. So, oh my goodness. This is just like the mother lode. And how often are you getting shipments or donations?
So it goes in ebbs and flows. The biggest time we usually get donations, let's be honest, is during Black History Month, Martin Luther King Day, or Women's History Month. That's when we get an influx, when everybody wants to do donation drives. Within our first year of opening, we've given out over 6 million products. Every week we're giving out over 63,000 products.
And to help distribute even more products, Lynette says they launched the first ever mobile menstrual health unit.
And we were intentional, even with the way the mobile unit, to have a big uterus, to have pads on there, and not in a shocking way, but really like, wow, what is this going? What are they talking about? Now they mixed up now. I don't know now.
We joined No More Secrets at a pop-up event in Philadelphia.
They can get all the resources in one space. They don't have to worry about getting, multiple daycare, people to watch their children, multiple times for getting bus fare. Everything is here so they can actually get everything in one spot, and then they can actually be able to live their lives in dignity.
Ain't that decent? You learn. I'm happy I walked over because I never knew about this. The lady sat me down and she explained to me about the cup, the Diva cup, and about the period pads, the organic pads that they sell, and it helps us females in the poverty too out here. So.
The United Nations says 1 out of every 10 menstruating youth misses school because of period poverty. And Lynette says there's a lack of menstrual education in public schools overall. That's why she does a demo with each person who receives products.
Just take it, put your finger down just like this, and you slide it right in. Whoop, it pops open, you give it a twist, and it creates a suction. And it sits right at the base of your cervix. The thing about the Diva Cup is that you can keep them for up to 4 to 5 years. Then you have some people that period underwear are lifesavers.
How much would something like a pack of period underwear cost?
So these run around $15 to $20, and these run around $40.
The Diva Cups?
Yes.
But then it's that upfront cost, but then you get to reuse it.
You get to reuse it, definitely.
A pack of tampons can cost an average of $7, maybe more if they're organic. Factor in a nearly 10% price increase over the last year due to inflation, that monthly cost adds up. And even before inflation, there's a sales tax on period products, often referred to as the tampon tax. It classifies period products as non-essential luxury goods in 23 states across the U.S. In 2019, sales tax on menstrual products could range anywhere from roughly 5 to 10%. But there have been some big advances in recent years. Colorado, Louisiana, and Iowa just scrapped the sales tax on menstrual products. And across the world, some countries are going even further. Scotland just became the first country in the world to offer free pads and tampons to anyone in need. And with a tampon shortage in the supply chain and inflation on the rise, period poverty is becoming even more common here in the U.S.
I see my daughter. I see people who struggle. I see people who are teachers. I see people who have other jobs. We had a person who collects trash come the other day. I don't want to do this. I have to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest things is that if we need organizations like mine to be able to address this deficit and for something as normal and natural as a period, what does that say about us as a community? What does that say about us as a state, as a federal governing body that's supposed to protect our most vulnerable populations?
That was NBC's Maura Barrett reporting, and thank you to producer Vruti Venkatasan and editor David Hall for that report. And thank you for making time for us tonight. Send your thoughts on this or anything we've discussed tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave us a voicemail or send us an email. But until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.